Dad's becoming a real problem, my son whispered into the phone, thinking I was asleep upstairs. We need to figure out how to get him into assisted living before he wastes all his money on stupid stuff. 43 years I poured my soul into Marinelli's pizza, working 16-hour days so my kids could have everything I never did. 3 years since my beautiful Angela passed, and this is how they see me, as a problem to be solved. I stood there in my hallway wearing the same blue pajamas Angela bought me for Christmas 5 years ago, my heart shattering into a million pieces. But here's what David and Christina don't know yet. Yesterday morning, I signed papers that will change everything. And after what I heard last night, I've made a decision that's going to shock them both. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Last Tuesday night, I heard my son David tell his sister Christina something that shattered my heart into a million pieces. Dad's becoming a real problem, he whispered into the phone, thinking I was asleep upstairs. We need to figure out how to get him into assisted living before he wastes all his money on stupid stuff. 43 years, I poured my soul into Marinelli's pizza, working 16-hour days so my kids could have everything I never did. 3 years since my beautiful Angela passed, and this is how they see me, as a problem to be solved. But here's what David and Christina don't know yet. Yesterday morning, I signed papers that will change everything. The old building that housed our family restaurant, I just sold it for $2.4 million. And after what I heard last night, I've made a decision that's going to shock them both. My name is Giuseppe Marinelli, but everyone calls me Joe. I'm 69 years old, and until 3 days ago, I thought my children loved me. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I wasn't wrong about the sound of disappointment in David's voice when he talked about his old man. I stood there in my hallway wearing the same blue pajamas Angela bought me for Christmas 5 years ago, listening to my son discuss my future like I was a piece of furniture that needed to be moved to storage. Christina, I'm serious, David continued, his voice getting more frustrated. He's been calling me every other day, asking if I want to come over for dinner. Yesterday, he showed up at my office with a container of his homemade sauce, acting like we're best friends or something. It's getting weird. Weird. That's what spending time with your father had become to him. Weird. I remember when David was 8 years old. He used to stand on a wooden crate next to me in the kitchen of our restaurant, his little hands covered in flour as he tried to roll pizza dough just like his papa. Someday I'm going to make pizza as good as you, Papa Joe, he'd say, with that gap-toothed smile. I'd ruffle his dark hair and tell him, someday you're going to be even better than your old man. I was right about that, in a way. He did become better than me. Better at making money, better at living in fancy suburbs, better at forgetting where he came from. David's a financial advisor, now drives a BMW, lives in a house worth more than I made in 20 years of slinging dough. Christina's doing well, too. She's a corporate lawyer downtown, married to some guy named Brad who wears suits that cost more than most people's rent. But success, I've learned, doesn't always make you a good person. And money doesn't automatically make you grateful for the sacrifices your parents made to give you opportunities they never had. Listen, David said to Christina that night, his voice dropping even lower. I talked to Brad about this. He says there are legal ways to get power of attorney, if we can prove Dad's not mentally competent to handle his finances. I mean, he's almost 70, living alone in that old house, talking to Mom's picture every night. That's not normal behavior, right? Not normal behavior. Talking to my deceased wife of 47 years wasn't normal behavior. I wanted to burst through that door and tell him exactly what I thought about his definition of normal. I wanted to remind him that his mother and I worked double shifts so he could go to college, that we ate pasta and beans for months, so we could afford his textbooks, that we never took a real vacation because every penny went toward building a better future for our children. Instead, I stood there in the dark hallway, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake the neighbors, because in that moment I realized something that changed everything. My children didn't love me anymore. They loved the idea of inheriting whatever money I had left, but they didn't love me. And that's when I remembered the phone call I'd gotten that morning from the real estate developer. The one about the building that housed Marinelli's Pizza for 4 decades. The building I'd just agreed to sell for more money than I'd ever imagined I could have. $2.4 million. That's what 43 years of blood, sweat, and tomato sauce was worth to some developer who wanted to tear it down and build luxury condos. I've made a decision that's going to shock them both. You want to know how I got to this point? How a man who spent his whole life building something beautiful ended up being called a problem by his own flesh and blood. Let me take you back to where it all began, because you need to understand. What Marinelli's pizza meant to our family before you can understand what my children threw away. It was 1978 when I first laid eyes on Angela Rossetti at St. Anthony's Church on Taylor Street. She was 22 with dark hair that caught the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. And when she smiled at me after Sunday Mass, I knew my life had just changed forever. I was 25 working construction during the day and dreaming of something bigger at night. My English wasn't perfect back then. My family had come from Sicily when I was 15. But Angela didn't seem to mind when I stumbled over my words asking her to coffee. "You want to take me for coffee?" She laughed that musical laugh I'd hear every morning for the next 47 years. "Giuseppe Marinelli, I've been waiting for you to ask me that question for 3 months." 6 months later, we were married in that same church. Angela wore her grandmother's wedding dress, and I wore the only suit I owned, the one I'd bought for job interviews. We didn't have much money for a honeymoon, so we spent 3 days in a little cabin up in Wisconsin, eating sandwiches and planning our future. That's when Angela first mentioned the empty storefront she'd noticed on Grand Avenue. "Giuseppe," she said, lying next to me under a quilt her mother had made, "what if we opened our own restaurant? You make the most incredible pizza I've ever tasted, and I know how to handle the business side. We could build something together, something that would last. Build something together." Those words became our motto, our mission, our entire reason for getting up every morning for the next 4 decades. We opened Marinelli's Pizza in January of 1979 with a loan from Angela's Uncle Tony, $200 in our checking account, and more hope than sense. The building was a mess. Peeling paint, broken tiles, a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Eisenhower administration. But Angela saw potential where I saw problems, and together we worked 18-hour days, turning that dump into something beautiful. Angela handled the front of the house, charming customers with her warm smile and remembering everyone's names and favorite orders. I worked the kitchen, perfecting recipes my grandmother had taught me back in the old country, adding my own touches to create something uniquely ours. Our pizza sauce had a secret ingredient, a touch of honey that Angela suggested, and our dough was made fresh every morning at 5 a.m. David was born in 1981, right there in the apartment above the restaurant. Christina followed 2 years later. Those early years were tough, but they were also magical. The kids would do their homework at table 6 while Angela balanced the books and I prepped for dinner service. David learned to count by helping me portion cheese, and Christina learned to read by studying the menu we'd taped to the wall. Papa Joe David would say, standing on that wooden crate so he could reach the prep counter, "Teach me how to make the dough spin in the air like you do." And I'd show him over and over again, watching his face light up every time he managed to keep that circle of dough spinning for more than 2 seconds. Those were the moments that made all the long hours worth it. Those were the moments when I thought I was building something that would last for generations. By the 1990s, Marinelli's had become more than just a restaurant. We were part of the neighborhood, part of people's lives. We catered Little League celebrations and graduation parties. We stayed open during blizzards to feed the snowplow drivers. We donated hundreds of pizzas to the local food bank every Christmas. Angela organized fundraisers for families in need, and I taught cooking classes for kids whose parents worked double shifts and didn't have time to cook. The business grew, but we never forgot why we'd started it. It wasn't just about making money. It was about creating a place where families could come together, where traditions could be passed down, where love could be shared one slice at a time. But then Angela got sick, and everything I thought I knew about family started to fall apart. Angela fought cancer for 18 months. 18 months of chemotherapy, radiation treatments, and hope that kept getting smaller with each doctor's visit. I closed the restaurant 3 days a week so I could drive her to appointments at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. David was 38, then Christina 36, both successful in their careers, both living comfortable lives in the suburbs. You'd think that when your mother is dying, you'd want to spend every possible moment with her. You'd think you'd put aside your busy schedule, your important meetings, your social obligations to be there for the woman who gave you life and sacrificed everything for your happiness. You'd be wrong. David visited exactly 4 times during those 18 months. 4 times. I counted because each visit gave Angela such joy that she'd talk about it for weeks afterward. "David looked so handsome in that new suit," she'd say, her voice weak but her eyes bright. "He's doing so well for himself, Giuseppe. We raised good children. Even as they were breaking her heart with their absence, Angela defended them. Christina came by more often, maybe once a month, but her visits felt like obligations rather than love. She'd sit in the chair next to Angela's bed, checking her phone every few minutes, making small talk about work and weather while her mother wasted away before her eyes. When Angela would try to share memories about Christina's childhood, about the time she dressed up as a pizza slice for Halloween, or the way she used to help count the register money, Christina would nod politely and change the subject. Mom, you need to focus on getting better, she'd say, not dwelling on the past. Dwelling on the past. That's what Christina called the beautiful memories that had sustained our family for decades. The worst part wasn't their absence during Angela's illness. The worst part was watching Angela make excuses for them. They're just busy, Giuseppe, she'd whisper when another week went by without a phone call. They have their own lives to live. We raised them to be independent, remember, independent. That was one way to put it. Selfish was another. When Angela died on that gray October morning in 2020, I called both kids immediately. David was in a meeting with clients from Japan. Christina was at a deposition that couldn't be rescheduled. They both promised to call me back later to discuss arrangements. Arrangements? Their mother's funeral had become a business transaction. The funeral was small, just like Angela would have wanted. Father DeMarco from St. Anthony's said a beautiful mass talking about Angela's kindness, her generosity, her devotion to family and community. David and Christina sat in the front pew with me, both dressed appropriately, both saying the right words to the people who came to pay their respects. But I could see the truth in their eyes. They were going through the motions, playing their parts as grieving children, while mentally calculating how long they'd need to stay before they could get back to their real lives. After the burial, after the last casserole had been delivered, and the last sympathy card had been read, I found myself alone in a house that felt too big and too quiet. For 47 years, Angela had been my partner in everything, business, parenting, life. Without her, I felt like half a person stumbling through days that seemed to stretch on forever. That's when I started calling my children more often. Not because I wanted anything from them, but because I needed to feel connected to something, to someone who shared my memories of Angela, who could help me process the grief that was threatening to swallow me whole. But David was always too busy. Dad, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back? Became his standard response. He never called back. Christina was more polite, but equally distant. How are you holding up, Dad? She'd ask, but I could hear the impatience in her voice when I actually tried to answer honestly. When I'd mention how much I missed Angela, how empty the house felt, how I sometimes caught myself setting 2 plates for dinner out of habit, she'd cut me off with practical advice. Dad, maybe you should consider seeing a grief counselor, or joining one of those senior groups at the community center. You need to get out more, meet new people. Meet new people, as if 47 years of marriage could be replaced by playing bingo with strangers. The restaurant had been struggling since Angela's death. Without her managing the front of the house, without her warmth drawing customers back week after week, Marinelli's felt like a shell of what it used to be. I tried to keep it going for a while, hiring managers who didn't understand that a restaurant is more than just food service. It's a place where memories are made. By 2022, I made the painful decision to close Marinelli's Pizza permanently. 43 years of dreams, recipes, and family history packed into boxes and stored in my basement. I kept the building thinking maybe someday David or Christina might want to reopen it, might want to carry on the tradition Angela and I had worked so hard to build. But when I mentioned this possibility to them, David just shrugged. Dad, the restaurant business is really tough these days. We've both got our own careers now. That's when everything started to change. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday morning in March 2023. I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee from the mug Angela had given me for our 30th wedding anniversary, the one with "World's Best Pizza Maker" printed in faded blue letters, when an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. Mr. Marinelli, this is Robert Chen from Lakefront Development Group. I hope I'm not calling too early. It was 7:30 in the morning, but I'd been awake since 5. Sleep doesn't come easy when you spend your nights talking to photographs and wondering where your life went wrong. I'm calling about your property on Grand Avenue, Chen continued. The building that housed Marinelli's Pizza. We've been working on a development project in that area, and your building sits right in the middle of our planned site. I'd like to discuss a possible purchase if you're interested. I almost hung up. That building wasn't just real estate to me. It was the physical embodiment of everything Angela and I had built together. The kitchen where we'd perfected our recipes, the dining room where we'd watched our children grow up, the apartment upstairs where we'd spent our first years as newlyweds. Selling it felt like selling my soul. Mr. Marinelli, are you still there? I'm here, I said, my voice rougher than I'd intended. But I'm not interested in selling. That building has been in my family for over 40 years. I understand completely, Chen replied, his tone respectful but persistent. And I want you to know that we're not just any development company. We specialize in creating mixed-use communities that honor the history of the neighborhoods we work in. We'd be happy to include a plaque or memorial recognizing Marinelli's pizza and its contribution to the community. A plaque. 43 years of blood, sweat, and dreams reduced to a bronze plaque that people would walk past without reading. Mr. Marinelli, would you be willing to meet with me? Just to hear what we have in mind, I think you might be surprised by our vision for the area. Something in his voice made me curious despite myself. Maybe it was the loneliness talking, or maybe I just wanted to hear someone speak about my building with respect, instead of dismissing it as an outdated relic of a bygone era. We met the following Tuesday at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the old restaurant. Chen was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He spread architectural drawings across our table, showing me plans for a mixed-use development that would include affordable housing, retail space, and a community center. The location is perfect, he explained, pointing to where my building sat on the blueprint. We're planning to call it Marinelli Commons, actually, in honor of your family's contribution to the neighborhood. Marinelli Commons. I felt a lump form in my throat. The city has approved our plans, and we've already purchased 8 of the 9 properties we need. Your building is the last piece of the puzzle. Without it, we can't move forward with the project. He slid a piece of paper across the table. When I saw the number written there, I had to read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. $2,400,000. I know it's a lot to process, Chen said gently. Take your time to think about it. Discuss it with your family. But I want you to know that this isn't just about money for us. We genuinely believe this development will revitalize the neighborhood while honoring its history. I drove home in a daze, that piece of paper burning a hole in my jacket pocket. $2.4 million. More money than I'd made in my entire lifetime of working. More money than I'd ever dreamed of having. My first instinct was to call David and Christina to share this incredible news with the 2 people who should care most about the family legacy. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of David's voice saying I was becoming a problem. Maybe it was Christina's impatience whenever I tried to share memories of their mother. Or maybe it was just a gut feeling that this news would change how they saw me, and not necessarily in a good way. Instead, I spent 3 weeks thinking. I drove past the old building every day, remembering the dreams Angela and I had shared, the life we'd built within those walls. I thought about the community center Chen had described, the affordable housing that would give other young couples the chance to build their own dreams. Most importantly, I thought about what Angela would want me to do. She'd always believed in helping others and using whatever blessings we had to make the world a little bit better. Giuseppe, she used to say, when you have more than you need, you build a longer table, not a higher fence. On a sunny April morning, I called Chen and told him I was ready to sign the papers. The closing took place at a law office downtown. I signed document after document, my hand shaking slightly, as I transferred ownership of the last physical connection to my life with Angela. But when the banker handed me a certified check for $2,400,000, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. For the first time since Angela's death, I had the power to make choices about my future. I could travel if I wanted to. I could move somewhere warm. I could help people who needed help. I could build something new, something meaningful, something that would honor Angela's memory in a way that went beyond bronze plaques and faded photographs. I was going to surprise David and Christina with the news, maybe take them out to dinner at a nice restaurant and tell them how their old man had finally hit the jackpot. I imagined their faces lighting up with genuine happiness for me, maybe even with a little pride that their father had made such a smart business decision. But they surprised me first. The transformation happened overnight, and it was so dramatic it would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. For 3 years after Angela's death, my phone had been quieter than a funeral home at midnight. David's calls came maybe once a month, always brief, always ending with some excuse about why he had to hang up. Christina was slightly better, checking in every couple of weeks, with the enthusiasm of someone calling to cancel a dentist appointment. But suddenly, on the Wednesday after I'd deposited that check, my phone started ringing like I was giving away free pizza. "Dad, how are you feeling today?" David's voice was so cheerful, I had to check the caller ID twice to make sure it was really him. "I was just thinking about you, and Christina and I were wondering if you'd like to come over for dinner this Saturday. Michelle's making that pot roast you used to love." Michelle. David's wife had a name, and he was actually using it when talking to me. For the past 3 years, she'd been my wife, or simply Michelle's busy whenever I asked about her. That sounds wonderful, I said, genuinely surprised by the invitation. Are you sure Michelle won't mind? I know how busy you both are. Mind, Dad, she's excited to see you. We both are. It's been too long since we've had a real family dinner. A real family dinner. The same man who'd been too busy to visit his dying mother was suddenly eager for quality time with his old man. Saturday couldn't come fast enough for David, apparently. He called me twice during the week to confirm I was still coming, to ask if I had any dietary restrictions I hadn't mentioned, to make sure I knew how to get to his house in Naperville. As if I hadn't been there a dozen times before, as if I was some stranger he was worried might get lost. When I arrived at David's house that Saturday evening, I barely recognized the place. The lawn was perfectly manicured, fresh flowers had been planted along the walkway, and through the front window I could see the dining room table set with what looked like their wedding china. David answered the door, wearing a smile so bright it could have powered half of Chicago. Dad, you look fantastic. Come in, come in. Christina and Brad are already here. Christina was there. Christina, who hadn't voluntarily spent an evening with me since before her mother's funeral, was sitting in David's living room holding a glass of wine and actually smiling when she saw me. Daddy, she said, using a nickname she hadn't called me since high school. She stood up and gave me a hug that lasted more than the obligatory 2 seconds I'd grown accustomed to. You do look wonderful. Have you been working out? Working out. I was 69 years old with arthritis in both knees and a back that creaked every time I got out of bed. But I appreciated the effort she was putting into this performance. Michelle emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron I'd never seen before, her face flushed from cooking. Giuseppe, I'm so happy you could make it. I've been preparing all afternoon. Pot roast garlic, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, and I even made tiramisu for dessert. I remembered how much you love Italian desserts, she remembered. Michelle, who had spoken maybe 50 words to me in the 15 years she'd been married to my son, suddenly remembered my dessert preferences. The dinner conversation was unlike anything I'd experienced with my children in years. David asked about my health, my hobbies, whether I was getting enough exercise. Christina wanted to know about my neighbors, if I was staying social, whether I needed help with anything around the house. Brad, who usually spent family gatherings scrolling through his phone, actually put the device away and asked thoughtful questions about my experiences running the restaurant. You must have so many interesting stories from all those years at Marinelli's, he said, leaning forward with apparent genuine interest. I'd love to hear about what it was really like building a business from scratch. For 2 hours I felt like I had my family back. We laughed, we shared memories, we talked about Angela with warmth instead of the awkward silence that usually followed any mention of her name. Christina showed me photos of a vacation she and Brad had taken to Italy, asking if I recognized any of the places from my childhood in Sicily. David talked about maybe taking early retirement, about wanting to spend more time with family while he was still young enough to enjoy it. It was everything I'd been hoping for since Angela died. Everything I'd been praying for during those long, lonely nights when I talked to her photograph and wondered if my children would ever see me as more than an obligation. But then the real reason for this sudden family reunion became clear. Dad, David said, as Michelle served the tiramisu, Christina and I have been talking, and we're worried about you living alone in that big house. You're not getting any younger, and we want to make sure you're safe and comfortable. We've been looking into some really nice senior living communities, Christina added, her voice sweet as the dessert in front of us. Places where you'd have your own apartment, but also access to meals, activities, medical care if you need it. You'd be around people your own age, people who share your interests, people my own age. As if being 69 automatically meant I had nothing in common with anyone under 65. The thing is, Dad, David, continued, these places can be expensive. But we've been thinking about your finances, and we want to help you make sure your money lasts as long as possible. I work with a lot of clients who are in similar situations, and I could help you set up some investments that would generate steady income for years to come. There it was. The real purpose of this elaborate dinner theater. They didn't want to spend time with their father. They wanted to manage his money. I really appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I'm doing fine financially. And I'm not ready to move out of the house your mother and I shared for 40 years. But Dad, Christina said, her lawyer instincts kicking in, you have to think practically. What if something happens to you? What if you fall and can't get help? What if your medical expenses start piling up? What if? Every question designed to make me feel vulnerable, dependent, grateful for their sudden interest in my welfare. Listen, David said, pulling out a folder I hadn't noticed him bring to the table. I've put together some information about investment strategies that could really benefit someone in your position. Conservative portfolios that would protect your assets while generating reliable returns. My position. The position of being old alone and presumably too stupid to handle my own affairs. That's when I realized the truth that should have been obvious from the moment David called with his dinner invitation. Somehow word had gotten out about the building sale. In a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business, in a city where real estate transactions were public record, my $2.4 million windfall had become common knowledge. My children didn't love me. They loved what they thought I could give them. That night I sat in Angela's chair with her reading lamp casting the same warm glow it had for 23 years, and I made the most important decision of my life. If my children wanted to play games, if they wanted to pretend our relationship was about anything other than money, then I was going to show them what real family looked like. I opened my laptop, the one Christina had given me 2 Christmases ago, back when she still felt obligated to buy me presents, and started researching, not investment opportunities or retirement communities like David and Christina kept pushing, but something far more meaningful. My first search was for St. Vincent's Food Kitchen on the South Side, the place where Angela had volunteered every Thanksgiving for 15 years. She'd come home with stories about families who had nothing about children, who went to bed hungry, about elderly people who had to choose between medication and meals. Giuseppe, she used to say, her eyes bright with purpose. These people don't need pity. They need hope. They need someone to believe they deserve better. I called the director, Maria Santos, a woman Angela had spoken about countless times. "Mr. Marinelli," she said, when I explained who I was, "I remember your wife so well. Angela was like an angel to the people we serve. She had this way of making everyone feel seen, feel valued. What can I do for you?" I told her about my situation. Not the details about David and Christina, just that I had come into some money and wanted to make a difference. "I'd like to establish a fund," I said, "to help families get back on their feet. Not just meals, but job training, childcare assistance, whatever they need to break the cycle." Maria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Marinelli, do you know how many families we see who are brilliant, hardworking, full of dreams, but who never get the chance to pursue them because they don't have anyone to help? A fund like that could change generations." We talked for 2 hours. She told me about Carlos, a single father of 3 who was working 2 jobs but still couldn't afford childcare for his youngest. About Rosa, a former teacher who'd lost her job during the pandemic and was now living in her car with her teenage daughter. About dozens of families who had potential but no opportunities, who were smart but not supported, who deserved love but had never truly received it. How much would it take, I asked, to really help 50 families over the next 5 years? Not just temporary assistance, but real life-changing support. Probably around $800,000, she said. That would cover job training, childcare, housing assistance, education support, everything they'd need to build stable, independent lives. $800,000, less than half of what I had. Money that could give 50 forgotten families the chance David and Christina had taken for granted. But I wasn't done planning. I remembered Father O'Brien at Holy Family Catholic Church, the small parish where Angela and I had been married 45 years earlier. The church was struggling, he'd mentioned at Angela's funeral. The roof leaked, the heating system was failing, and they were serving meals to homeless veterans out of a kitchen that barely functioned. I called him that evening. Giuseppe, his Irish accent still thick after 30 years in Chicago. "How are you holding up, my friend?" When I told him about my idea to help renovate the church and expand their veteran outreach program, I could hear the emotion in his voice. "Giuseppe, we've been praying for a miracle. The city wants to condemn our building if we can't make the necessary repairs. $200,000 would not only save the church, it would let us serve 3 times as many veterans. $200,000 to help people who had served their country and been forgotten by it. People who needed help, not people who were pretending to need it." Then I remembered Jimmy Kowalski, a guy I'd worked with when I was young, before I opened the restaurant. Jimmy had been laid off from the steel mill at 58 and had been driving for a food delivery service ever since, trying to make ends meet on $20 a day. His wife, Susan, had called me a few months ago, crying because they were about to lose their house. I called Susan that night. "Susan, it's Giuseppe Marinelli. How are you and Jimmy doing?" The flood of problems came pouring out. Medical bills, mortgage payments, Jimmy's pride preventing him from asking for help. They needed about $60,000 to get back on their feet, but they'd never ask for it. "Susan," I interrupted gently, "what if I told you that help was coming? By the end of that week, I had it all planned out. $800,000 for the Family Assistance Fund at St. Vincent's. $200,000 for Holy Family Church, $60,000 for Jimmy and Susan. Another $140,000 split between the local food bank, the Veterans Shelter, and a scholarship fund for kids whose parents couldn't afford college. That left me with exactly $1,200,000. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without depending on anyone. Enough to rent a small place somewhere warm, maybe near the ocean. Enough to have dignity and independence while helping people who actually deserved help. But first, I had one more idea. Something that would honor Angela's memory in a way that went beyond charity. Something that would bring the community together the way Marinelli's Pizza used to do. I was going to start a food truck business. Not for profit, but for purpose. 3 trucks that would serve affordable homemade Italian food to working families, construction crews, and anyone else who needed a good meal at a fair price. I'd hire recent immigrants, people looking for a second chance, people who understood what it meant to work hard for your dreams. And maybe, just maybe, I'd teach some of them how to make pizza dough spin in the air the way I'd once tried to teach my son. The hardest part wasn't planning how to give away the money. The hardest part was accepting that my only children had never really loved me at all. But sometimes the truth, even when it breaks your heart, is the only thing that can set you free. I spent the next 3 days writing letters. Not angry letters. I wasn't interested in revenge, but truthful letters. Letters that explained exactly what I had overheard, exactly what I had discovered about their real feelings toward me, and exactly what I had decided to do about it. Tomorrow I would tell them the truth. I chose a Sunday afternoon for what I knew would be our final conversation. David had called that morning, the 3rd time that week, asking if I wanted to come over for family brunch and to continue our discussion about your financial planning. Sure, I said, my voice calm despite the storm brewing in my chest. I have some things I need to share with both of you anyway. I arrived at David's house at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a manila envelope that contained 2 letters and the most important speech I'd ever prepared. David answered the door with his usual performance smile, but I could see something different in his eyes today. Impatience, maybe, or the confidence of someone who thought they were about to close a deal. Dad, perfect timing. Christina just got here and Michelle made those lemon cookies you love. Another favorite from my childhood that had suddenly been remembered. How convenient. We sat in their living room, the same room where they'd performed their Caring Children act, just 2 weeks earlier. Christina was wearing a blue dress, the same shade as one Angela used to wear, and I wondered if that choice was intentional. David had prepared another folder thicker this time, full of investment prospectuses and legal documents. Dad, Christina began, her voice, honey sweet, we've been doing more research since our last dinner and we really think we've found the perfect solution for your situation. My situation. There was that phrase again. We found this amazing senior community in Scottsdale, David added, pulling out glossy brochures. It's got everything. Golf course, swimming pool, organized activities. You'd love it there. And the best part is, it's a life care community, so you'd never have to worry about medical expenses again. The only thing is, Christina said, leaning forward with practiced concern, these places require a significant upfront investment. But David's run the numbers, and if we restructure your assets properly, you could easily afford it. Restructure my assets. Translation, give them control of my money. Actually, I said, standing up slowly, I have some news about my assets that I think will surprise you both. I pulled the first letter from my envelope and handed it to David. I need you to read this out loud. Both of you need to hear what I have to say. David looked confused but took the letter. His hands were shaking slightly as he unfolded it, and I watched his face change from confusion to shock to something that looked like panic as he read the first few lines silently. Dad, what is this? Christina asked, her voice tight with worry. Read it out loud, David. Let your sister hear what her father has to say. His voice was barely a whisper as he began, Dear David and Christina, by the time you read this letter, I will have already donated most of my assets according to my wishes. 3 months ago, I sold the Marinelli's Pizza building for $2,400,000. The folder of investment documents hit the floor. Christina's face went white. Wait, what? David's voice cracked. You already had the money. Why didn't you tell us? I held up my hand for silence. Keep reading, David. He cleared his throat, his voice getting stronger but more strained. I kept this information private because I wanted to see how you would treat me when you thought I had nothing to offer you. What I discovered broke my heart in ways I never thought possible. Christina started to say something, but I cut her off. Let him finish. I have decided to donate $800,000 to establish the Angela Marinelli Family Support Fund at St. Vincent's Food Kitchen, where your mother volunteered for 15 years. This fund will help 50 families who have been abandoned by their own relatives build new lives. Dad, stop, Christina said, tears forming in her eyes. This is crazy. You can't just give away money like that. You need to think about your future, about what, Christina? About trusting you with my money so you can charge me management fees while you invest in your husband's law firm's retirement fund. I heard that conversation, too. David found his voice. Dad, let's talk about this rationally. You're making emotional decisions. You need professional advice. Professional advice, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. From the son who called me a problem that needed to be solved. From the daughter who told her mother-in-law that spending time with me was exhausting. Both of their faces went pale. They'd forgotten about that phone call, the one I'd overheard 3 weeks ago. I walked to their picture window, looking out at their perfectly manicured suburban life. $200,000 will go to Holy Family Church to repair their building and expand their veteran outreach program. Another $100,000 will be distributed to local charities that actually help people in need. This is insane, Christina said, her lawyer instincts kicking in. Dad, you're not thinking clearly. We can contest this. We can contest what I turned back to face them. Contest my right to spend my own money as I see fit. Contest the fact that I'm donating to charities instead of funding your retirement plans. I pulled out the second envelope and set it on their coffee table. This contains my new address, my new phone number, and instructions for how to contact me if and only if you ever figure out the difference between loving someone and using them. The silence in the room was deafening. David stared at the papers scattered around his feet. Christina sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time, but I suspected they were tears of frustration and loss, not love. I'm 70 years old, I said quietly, and I just learned that my only children see me as nothing more than a walking ATM. Do you have any idea how that feels, Dad? That's not true, Christina whispered. We do love you. You love what you thought I could give you, I replied. There's a difference, and we both know it. I walked toward their front door, the same door I'd entered so many times over the years, hoping for genuine connection, genuine affection from my own flesh and blood. I'm keeping $1.2 million, I said, with my hand on the doorknob. Enough to live independently with dignity for the rest of my life. Enough to never have to depend on children who see their father as a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved. Dad, please, David called after me. Don't do this. We can work it out. We can. You wanted my money, not my love, I said, opening the door. Well, congratulations. You've taught me the difference between the two. I walked out of their lives forever, leaving behind 30 years of disappointment and a lifetime of misplaced hope. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe again. The last thing I heard as I got in my car was Christina sobbing. How could he do this to us? Even in their moment of loss, they couldn't understand that this wasn't something I was doing to them. This was something I was doing for myself. 6 months later, I was standing in front of my first food truck on a sunny Tuesday morning in Little Village, watching steam rise from fresh-made meatballs and listening to the sound that had been missing from my life for too long, genuine laughter. Mr. Joe called out Maria Gonzalez, a young mother who'd been one of the first recipients of the Angela Marinelli Family Support Fund. The usual for my crew, she was managing a construction team now thanks to the job training program we'd funded. 6 months ago, she'd been living in her car with her 2 kids. Today, she was ordering lunch for 12 workers, paying with money she'd earned through her own hard work and determination. Coming right up, Maria, I called back, tossing pizza dough in the air with the same flourish I'd perfected 40 years ago at Marinelli's. The workers cheered every time I made the dough spin, just like customers used to do at the restaurant. This was what $2.4 million looked like, when it was spent on love instead of manipulation. The Nonna Angela food truck had become a fixture in the neighborhood, serving authentic Italian food at prices working families could afford. But it was more than just a business. It was a training ground. I'd hired 6 people so far, all of them immigrants or folks who needed a second chance. Roberto from El Salvador was learning to make pizza sauce. Fatima from Somalia had mastered the art of rolling meatballs. Each of them sent money home to their families while building new lives here in America. Giuseppe, Father O'Brien's voice called from across the street. He was walking toward the truck with a spring in his step I hadn't seen in years. The church renovation was almost complete, and last Sunday, they'd served hot meals to over 200 veterans in their brand new kitchen. Father, your usual, I asked already, preparing his favorite, a meatball sub with extra sauce. You know me too well, he laughed. But I'm not here for lunch. I wanted to tell you about the call I got this morning. The city wants to feature our veteran program in their community outreach newsletter. They're calling it a model for how private charity and community partnerships can really make a difference. A model. The money David and Christina had wanted to invest was instead creating something that would outlast all of us. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos at St. Vincent's. The Family Support Fund had helped its 20th family find stable housing and employment. 20 families who now had hope instead of desperation, opportunity instead of obstacles. But the most meaningful change in my life wasn't about the money I'd given away. It was about the family I'd found. Giuseppe, you're going to burn those peppers if you keep daydreaming, said a voice that still made my heart skip a beat, even after 3 months of hearing it every day. Isabella Romano had walked into my life on a rainy Thursday in September, ordering a simple pasta lunch and staying for 2 hours of conversation that felt like coming home. She was 65, a retired teacher whose husband had passed away 4 years earlier. She'd been volunteering at the food bank where I donated leftover meals each evening. A man who feeds people for a living and gives away food for free, she'd said that first day, her dark eyes twinkling with mischief. Either you're a saint or you're trying to impress someone. Maybe a little of both, I'd admitted, and she'd laughed. That same musical laugh that reminded me of Angela, but different enough to be its own beautiful song. Isabella wasn't Angela, and I wasn't trying to replace what Angela and I had shared. But at 69 years old, I discovered that the heart doesn't stop growing just because it's been broken. Love isn't a finite resource that gets used up. It's more like pizza dough. The more you stretch it, the more it can cover. You're right about the peppers, I said, flipping them quickly while she shook her head in mock disapproval. 43 years in the restaurant business, and you still get distracted by pretty women, she teased. Just one pretty woman, I corrected, and she blushed like a teenager. We'd been taking things slow, Isabella and I. Coffee dates, walks along Lake Michigan, dinners where we talked about everything except the pain we'd both survived. She knew about David and Christina, but she didn't pity me for their betrayal. Instead, she admired my strength in walking away from toxicity and building something better. You know what I love most about you, she'd said just last week as we watched the sunset from Navy Pier. You don't need anyone to complete you. You're whole all by yourself. That makes choosing to be with you feel like a gift instead of an obligation. Choosing to be with someone instead of needing to be with them. That was the difference between real love and the desperate dependency I'd mistaken for family loyalty. The lunch rush was winding down when my phone rang. For a moment, my heart clenched. It was a Chicago area code I didn't recognize. 6 months of peace, and I still felt a jolt of anxiety whenever I thought David or Christina might be trying to contact me. But it was Jimmy Kowalski's voice on the other end, thick with emotion. Giuseppe, I don't know how to thank you. Susan and I, we closed on the house today. It's really ours again. And I wanted you to know I got hired full-time at the construction company. Real benefits, good pay, the whole thing. Jimmy and Susan were going to be okay. The $60,000 had given them breathing room to find their footing, and they'd used it to build something sustainable instead of just surviving day to day. You don't need to thank me, Jimmy. You did the hard work. I just gave you a chance to show what you were capable of. Well, Susan's making her famous lasagna this Sunday, and we want you and Isabella to come for dinner. It's the least we can do. Dinner with friends who wanted my company, not my money. A simple invitation that meant more than all the elaborate performances David and Christina had staged. As I closed up the truck that evening, I thought about the letter I'd received last week. It was from David, forwarded through my lawyer, since I'd made it clear I didn't want direct contact. He'd written about how sorry he was, how he and Christina had been going through a difficult time and hadn't meant to seem ungrateful. He'd asked if we could work things out and rebuild our relationship, but there was no mention of understanding why I'd made my choices. No acknowledgement that they'd treated me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. Just regret about losing access to money they'd never earned and never deserved. I'd thrown the letter away without responding. Some bridges once burned are meant to stay that way. Ready to head home, Isabella asked, linking her arm through mine as we walked toward my car. Home. For the first time in 3 years, that word meant something again. Not just a building where I slept, but a feeling of belonging, of being valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. Ready, I said, and I meant it. At 70 years old, I'd learned the most important lesson of my life. You can't force people to love you, but you can choose to love yourself enough to walk away from people who don't. You can choose to surround yourself with kindness instead of tolerating cruelty. And you can choose to give your time, energy, and yes, even your money to people who will use it to build something beautiful instead of people who will use it to feed their greed. The Angela Marinelli Family Support Fund will help families for generations to come. Holy Family Church will serve veterans and homeless families long after I'm gone. And somewhere in this city there are people living better lives because I chose love over obligation, purpose over manipulation. That's what $2.4 million looks like when it's spent on real family. The kind you choose, the kind that chooses you back, the kind that sees you as a person worth knowing, instead of a problem to be solved. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? And from which city are you listening to this story of how one old man learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to start over? Sometimes the most profound lessons come from the deepest pain. Giuseppe's story isn't just about a grandfather who discovered his children's greed. It's about the courage to redefine what family truly means. At 70 years old, he learned that love isn't about blood relations or shared history. Real love is about choosing to see someone's worth beyond what they can give you, about valuing their presence over their presence, about building each other up instead of tearing each other down. Giuseppe's decision to walk away wasn't born from anger or revenge. It came from self-respect and the wisdom that some relationships become toxic, not because of what people do to you, but because of what you allow them to continue doing. He chose dignity over desperation, purpose over pity, and authentic connection over obligatory contact. In doing so, he discovered that the family we choose can be more loyal than the family we're born into. The most beautiful part of Giuseppe's transformation wasn't the money he gave away, or even the lives he changed through his generosity. It was his willingness to start over at an age when most people have resigned themselves to accepting whatever life has dealt them. He proved that it's never too late to demand better for yourself, to choose love over convenience, to build something meaningful from the ashes of disappointment. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.